Welcome back to Down Under Stormtrooper. I'm Paul, and today we're going to have a look at the Rogue One Stormtrooper 3D print files. I'm a newcomer to 3D printing. I've been working on 3D printed projects for about 6 months now, but I still feel like I've got plenty to learn. I figured now was a great time to introduce myself into 3D printing. The devices themselves have improved significantly. You don't need to assemble them component by component anymore, and the software itself's really matured. And there's also a wealth of knowledge available for support in the 3D printing community for when you get stuck. So while the printers are still not completely plug and play, it's a far cry from those days pioneered by the early adopters of the technology. So I reckon I spent a good week just printing out test models to hone in the settings of my printer, which is an Anycubic Cobra Plus. And it took me a little while to get the prints just right so that they were reliable and repeating in quality. I was lucky to have a really good network of friends that have been 3D printing for ages, so they were able to give me a lot of help and guidance. My goal for getting a 3D printer was always to build Star Wars armor, but I knew I needed to get some experience, so I started to tackle some smaller projects first. So I turned to another cosplay passion of mine, and that was Ghostbusters. My favourite piece is the ecto goggles. It's a great hybrid of real-world components like the snaps, the knurled screws, and the VR goggle padding. But I've also created a belt gizmo, lifeguard 2 alarm, and a Motorola walkie-talkie. And I was pretty chuffed when a friend of mine, who's been 3D printing for years now, thought I'd actually found a Motorola MT500 shell. So I figured if it holds up when somebody's got it in their hands, then it's going to work perfectly when I'm out there cosplaying and people are only going to be seeing it from a distance. So in this video description, I'll list each of the STL file links where I grabbed them from Thingiverse. So after completing several props, I decided it was time to stop fluffing around with these smaller prints and tackle something big. I purchased the Rogue One Stormtrooper files from Galactic Armory after doing a fair bit of research and reading some favourable reviews from people that have used their other files. They've been around for quite some time. I felt confident that the quality would be a big step up from what I see on Thingiverse. I should mention, this video isn't sponsored at all by Galactic Armory. I purchased these files myself with my own funds, so any sort of review that you get out of these, my work with these files is based on my own personal experience. So you can purchase per model on Galactic Armory, just like I did, or they do have a few Patreon monthly based subscription tiers, which allows you to get access to a larger collection of files. Having been creating 3D files since 2017, Galactic Armory really understand how to produce quality models with the builder and the cosplayer in mind. So when you receive the helmet files, you can see that they're in multiple variations. There's fully assembled with or without the teeth, a version with or without the aerators, and a solid filled version. But perhaps most useful and importantly, you get a slice of the helmet, so this is a super quick print that allows you to work out if you need to scale the helmet files up or down to fit your head. Now, because this is only just a few layers of the 3D print file, it saves you a heap of time, money and materials by getting the helmet the right fit first go. The helmet comes in 3 main parts: the face, the back and the dome. And you get variations for each, where the detailed greebles are either included or separated depending on your preference. Now I must say I really value that the greebles are available in different files. If for example you have a resin printer, you may get better results for the finer detail parts with printing in a resin printer. But with these parts separated, it's really going to make painting these parts so much simpler. No need to mask up the assembled helmet. The other great feature that I love with the greeble design from Galactic Armory is that they've added alignment devices. So these are recesses and bumps that guide you in correctly assembling the components to the main helmet in the correct orientation. That's really smart model design. The aerators, also known as hobby mic tips, come in a hollow version or one with a printable mesh. I've printed both, but I've decided to go with the hollow version as I'm going to add the real mesh during the assembly afterwards. Galactic Armory has also supplied the helmet files pre-separated to cater for small printers. So I'm pretty lucky the Anycubic Cobra Plus has a 300 by 300 by 350 tall bed size, so that allows me to print the helmet in just the 3 main parts. But if you've got a smaller printer, they provided the versions of the files that are sliced up ready to go for you. After printing the Ghostbusters props, I had some issues with the cleanup of the ladder style supports. Ladder supports are rigid and linear, and I found that they use a heap of material for the supports and almost always were damaging my model. You can see this most prevalently in the inside of the ecto goggles. Now it's not a big deal there because the inside's only seen by the wearer and not by the public. For the Stormtrooper print, I've decided to use organic supports. So organic or tree supports in 3D printing typically refer to a support structure generated during the printing process that mimics branching structures of trees. Organic or tree-like supports aim to address these post-processing issues by providing more efficient and easy to remove support structures. These supports follow a branching pattern similar to the roots and branches of a tree, providing stability where needed without using excessive material. The advantage is that they're designed to break away more cleanly, reducing the effort for post-processing and minimalising the impact on the final printed object's surface finish. The implementation of supports often involves advanced slicing algorithms and software features that generate these support structures based on the specific geometry of the 3D model. Fortunately, the slicing software used to prepare a 3D model for printing manages the generation of organic supports for you. You just need to enable that in the software. I'm using Prusa Slicer for example. So far I've found the organic supports to be excellent, but I have had a fail. When I printed the dome for the helmet, I used the tree supports to assist with the bridging on the top of the dome, but about 3/4 of the way through the print head started clipping the top of the support. There must have been some sort of layer separation that pushed the tips of the branches up into the path of the extruder. Now this resulted in some of the trees snapping and collapsing into the middle of the dome cavity. So I was about a click away from cancelling the entire print. I reached out to my 3D printing brains trust and was reassured that dome shapes such as helmets are usually self-supporting, even at the apex of the dome, so they don't usually need support material. So thankfully I persevered and the print managed to complete successfully, albeit with a lot of wasted filament that continued to be printed because it was still trying to use those support elements. So some of the lessons I've learned with printing the Ghostbusters props is that you can still see sometimes the layer lines. Now the public don't tend to see them at all, but I notice them and it bugs me no end. So I wanted to find a way of getting a much better finish. And so what I wanted to do with this project is to try out using UV resin. I've never used it before, so this would be a really good experiment. Now I don't want to jump in and start UV resin on a large part of the build. What I thought I'd do is start with something nice and small, so I decided to use the hand plates. So these are just the plates that live on the back of the Stormtrooper's hands. They're nice and small, so if I can make a complete mess of the UV resin process, then it's not a big deal if I've got to reprint those parts. So before I can start using the UV resin on the hand plates, I've got to do a bit of cleanup of the print files. This will often involve cleaning up the burrs. So these are just some of the problems that occur around the edge of the print files. It's usually where there's been a brim or some of the supports have been placed, and that can cause burrs. So I use a quick cleanup process with that, just using a deburring tool, and if I need to, I'll resort to a sharp knife. Now 3D print files, you'll often get what's known as blobs and zits, and these are often caused where the extruder started printing that part of the plastic, so maybe where it starts a new layer. Now you can use your tools like Prusa Slicer to set up where it aligns those new layer prints, and that way at least you get all of those blemishes in pretty much the same area of the project. Makes cleaning up a lot easier. So these are often cleaned up really easily with just a bit of 80 grit sandpaper. If they've got any harder blemishes there, you can resort to maybe a metal file that'll get rid of some of those too. So once I've done the 80 grit sandpaper, I'll then move on to a 120 grit. I've also experienced some issues with layer separation. Hasn't been too big an issue. It's only happened to maybe 1 or 2 of the prints so far. And it's likely caused by temperature changes with the filament. So maybe the temperature is getting a bit cold between the different layers of the 3D print, and it's causing the plastic not bond properly with the previous layer. So my approach to tackle gaps when they do occur is to use the UV resin to fill in those gaps. UV resin is a lot easier to sand as well, so I won't be having to resort to something more difficult to use as bog. And it's also, the gaps are quite small anyway. The other advantage of using the UV resin to fill those gaps, it's also going to strengthen the model too. So the first step is to prep those hand plates. before I can do anything with the UV resin. So the equipment I'm going to use here is the burring knife to clean up the edges, and I'll use also a metal file to get rid of some of those blemishes and those zits. But most of those will come off with an 80 grit piece of sandpaper, and then I can move on to a 120 grit. That's also going to smooth out some of the layer lines that may appear. So before I start using the UV resin, it's important to have a quick chat about the safety gear that I'm using. UV resin does have a bit of a noxious odour, so I'm going to be putting a respirator on just to make sure I'm not breathing in any nasty fumes. The other thing I'm using is some goggles, so it's important to have eye protection just in case I splash any resin. I don't want to get it into my eyes. I'm also using some rubber gloves. If I get any resin on me, I don't want that on my bare hands. The other thing too is that when you're using the torch to set and cure the resin, there is actually a chemical process and it heats up the resin, so it may be some risk there of some burns. So my approach with applying the UV resin is to do it in just thin layers. So that means I'm not going to get any sort of lumps or bumps in the UV layer when it sort of gets cured. Because if I do that, then it just means it's going to be extra work afterwards with additional sanding. So lots of little small layers, and I just can keep applying those layers as needed after I cure each layer. So I'm really happy with the UV resin test. The finish is absolutely amazing. It's such a smooth finish that we've got with the UV resin. I'm not seeing any layer lines at all from the print, and it's super smooth. So that's going to look great, and it actually feels a bit stronger than it was. That might sound a bit weird, but it does feel a little bit stronger than it was when it was just the plastic itself. So my next step now is I'll be able to use some spray putty on these. This is a paint primer and a spray putty, so it will fill in any minor holes that are still apparent on the piece. And then I can move into wet and dry sanding on the hand plates. But I'll save that for another day because I'm going to do a whole lot of those in one hit. So if you have any comments or questions, especially around some of the problems I've been having with 3D printing, maybe you might have some advice, then please leave me a comment. I look forward to reading them. So thanks for joining me again. Until next time, may those costuming gods be with you.